Thank you very much, everybody, and welcome to the Transport and Place Scrutiny Panel for the 5th of December 2024. During the meeting, all participants will be in control of their own microphone, and please ensure that you turn your microphone on when you are speaking and remember to turn it off when you are finished. All reports published as part of the agenda will be considered as read by members of the panel. Published reports will therefore be summarised to allow the panel to focus on questions. Please be aware that we are still in a pre-election period, and I will encourage everyone to stick to the topic at hand and avoid straying into political discussions that may affect support for one political party. Apologies for absence. I have had apologies from Councillor Aidan Smith, Councillor Callum O'Byrne-Mulligan and Councillor Denise Scott-MacDonald. Do you have any others? No. Item 2, urgent business. Any urgent business from the panel? No. Item 3, declarations of interest. Members to be if they have any declarations of interest? No. Finally, item 4, minutes to be confirmed from the previous meeting. Is everyone happy to confirm the previous minutes?
I had one correction, Chair, which is that my name was spelt wrong. It was D-A-V-I-S, whereas in the report it's D-A-V-I-E-S. So it was just to correct that.
Noted. We can solve that. Okay, but otherwise happy to agree. Brilliant. Okay, thank you. So we're going to move on to item 5, which is the Highways Asset and Risk Management. And thank you very much for John Wallace for joining us. So I think we're going to start with a presentation and then we'll move to questions after. But I'll hand over to you. Thank you, John.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So I have quite a few slides to get through here. Excuse me. So I'm going to canter through this. And yes, obviously, then I can take questions at the end. So the purpose of the report, the purpose of this presentation is to give you an update on a piece of work that we're currently working on, which is the Highways Infrastructure Asset Management Plan, or HIAMP for short. That's the main thing that I'm going to be dealing with today. I will then finish off with a few very quick updates on a couple of key highway structures, so Creek Road Bridge, Petman Crescent, and the 2 foot tunnels. So just to give you an idea what the HIAMP is, it is a strategic approach to highways management. Now, I've mentioned a few key benefits up there. So if you consider that a lot of although the highways management regime that we follow is still regarded as best practice, it has some limitations. It leads us towards quite short-term planning in that we deal with issues, problems that come up from year to year without any real long-term planning of when we think problems will occur in the future. It's not linked to the relative importance of various roads. It's not linked to the importance either in terms of their function, their highways function, or in terms of what they do for us as a local authority, in terms of they might service some key tourism assets, some key religious churches and mosques and so on. In terms of the next point, defence against claims, we get lots of claims. All local authorities get lots of claims for people tripping over broken paving slabs and things like that. We are fortunately very good at defending against those because our current maintenance regime is still regarded as best practice, and so we're very, very successful at defending against those. But we are aware that these claims continue coming through and that we have to always be exhibiting best practice in how we do these and how we exercise our approach to highways asset management. Finally, we get lots of casework that we have to deal with where people want to know why we're doing certain roads, why we're working on certain roads, why we're not working on this footpath, why we're working on that footpath. And it generates a lot of casework which takes up quite a lot of time. And so one of the things that we want to do is have a much more transparent approach to how we make these decisions around which roads we're going to work on, which footpaths we're going to work on, etc. So this is just a quick overview of our total asset inventory. So it's valued at £1 billion. Consists of, well, you've seen the report, so I won't go into the details here, but in terms of ranking us alongside other London boroughs, that's fairly typical in terms of the total length of carriageways and so on. And this is the funding that we've had for the last couple of years, with which we are to maintain those assets that I've just shown you. So the figures, the first column is 2020 through to 2021, the final column is 24 through to 25. And what you can see if you look at the totals right at the very bottom is that the actual total amount of funding we had available has grown by 11% since 2020. However, if you compare that against this, which is a number of standard indices measuring the relative regular costs for doing various highways activities, you can see that since 2014, costs have increased by between 34 to 54%. Just looking at the graph, you can see that around 2020, 21, there was a massive upsurge there. So what happened was that after the COVID epidemic, whenever that died down, there was a huge demand, huge pent-up demand for infrastructure projects, and so there were massive shortages worldwide in construction materials. That then was made worse by the war in Ukraine. So Ukraine was one of the leading steel suppliers for most UK local authorities in terms of building or replacing street lighting columns. Many local authorities sourced their steel from Ukraine. Obviously, when the war kicked off over there, that became a big problem. So as you can see, since 2020, we've got 27% increase in plant, 44% increase in concrete, 34% increase in asphalt. And that compares with the 11% increase in funding. So clearly, we're having to make our funding work an awful lot harder. This is just a comparison of relative funding for different local boroughs, London boroughs. The grey boroughs are ones where we haven't been able to get information. As you can see, for those that we have been able to get information for, Greenwich is, in terms of plant maintenance, pretty close to the bottom in terms of the funding we commit. So I mentioned our current maintenance strategy, and what we do is based on something called the Code of Practice for Well-Managed Highways. That's some guidance that was issued in 2016. And through that, we do a standard routine of regular inspections and cleaning, emergency repairs, proactive long-term works. Any emergency repairs are dealt with typically either, if they're a real emergency, we aim to rectify them within 24 hours. Sometimes it'll be less, if they're less urgent than 48 hours, even less urgent than 28 days. And planned works, they're obviously planned long in advance. So given that we are already following best practice, what's the reason for us to develop the high amp? Well, firstly, it's going to tie in, and this is a really critical part of this, it's going to tie in our approach to maintenance to the Council's higher level objectives. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. In fact, I'm going to expand on most of these things later. It will capture best practice in maintenance techniques that are emerging across the industry and across the country. It'll be very data focused, and will involve a great deal more communication about what we're doing and why we're doing it. So strategic asset management is defined by the Institute of Asset Management as, well, you can say it using physical infrastructure assets effectively to achieve no growth organization's mission. So what that means is, rather than us doing maintenance on our highways because we've got an existing road and there is some sort of damage taking place there, and so we therefore basically try to put right what was there, what's gone wrong. We do something a lot more strategic, and we look at the council's objectives, because it's not necessarily the case that we want to spend all of our money on roads. There is much more of a focus on spending our money on footways, improving cycle infrastructure, and so on. And so the purpose of the HIAMP is to tie in our maintenance decisions so that they reflect our wider objectives. And so our strategic objectives in our Greenwich, and reflected also in the transport strategy, well, I won't go through these, but you'll all be aware of these. And so what we seek to do is address those key objectives. And we're going to do that through these key themes, recognizing the high-level drivers. So that's basically what the policies and objectives are. Understanding better what our assets are and how they work together. Planning better our maintenance and investment, and making a better job communicating what we're doing and why we're doing it. Sorry, I'm going to talk you through each of those 4 points right now, just a little bit more detail. So performance management, recognize high-level drivers. So what I mean by that then is that's the policy side of things. So we know that what we want to do is, at a policy level, we want to increase the proportion of people who walk and cycle. Now, defining performance statements, what that is it's turning that policy objective into something that's much easier to understand. And so in this instance, if we want to increase the proportion of people who walk and cycle, and walk in particular, we need to maintain footways in a safe, accessible condition. And then what we do is we turn that into a performance indicator where we can measure how we achieve that. And so in this instance, the performance percentage of footways in a state of good repair. Next part of delivering the HIAMP. So that's getting a better understanding of how we can measure how we're achieving our objectives. The next stage then is about data-driven decision making. So it's collecting better data, presenting better data, and looking at the different data sources that we have and looking to combine them in unique ways to try to better understand how we should be investing our money. So if I give you a few examples. Now the data, this is using sample data, but it just gives you an idea of some of the things that we are going to be developing, or which we are developing right now through the HIAMP. So what this is showing is reactive jobs. So that's basically where we've had to go out to rectify some sort of condition, some sort of problem on a street, on a carriageway, or on a footway. And as you can see from the local level one, so that's Plumstead High Street. As you can see from the local level one, it's all color coded, so we can very, very easily see where the real problems are occurring. Not only can we see it as officers, but if the public are saying, well, why are you spending all of that money in Plumstead High Street? well, we can say, well, there you go. That's why we're doing it. So that's on a local level. If you look at the very top, there's the red blobby one. That's just showing it sort of zoomed out, and that's showing it at a wider level, so that's Eltham. I won't go into the other figures over there but they're a bit less meaningful. But I think you can hopefully see that we're going to be generating information that it's useful for us as officers, but also it's useful for everyone who we communicate this data with, to help them to understand why we're doing the things that we do. This is a key part of the HIAMP. It's the network hierarchy. So what we've done is we have reviewed all of the roads and footways in the borough, and we've classed them using various different criteria. So volumes of traffic, volumes of pedestrian footfall, volumes of cyclists. And those are kind of the traditional things that you would always use if you were classifying a network hierarchy. But what we've also done is we've added in additional factors such as it says up there, schools, stations, train stations, rail stations, town centres, places of worship. So we've used those it could be a street that actually doesn't have a very high vehicle volumes, but actually it's got a school on it. And so that's something that, we need to treat that a bit better than just a regular street. This is just another example of where we can combine different data sources. So the blue here, the blue bits are areas of high flood risk. So this is based on Environment Agency data, the modeling data that they're provided for us, pretty much based on where you have areas where they're relatively low lying compared to other sort of neighboring areas. So quite clearly, if we get heavy rainfall or a significant rainfall event, water will naturally drain towards these areas, and that puts them at higher risk of flooding. So that's what the blue is. If you can see the little yellow dots, the yellow dots, they show our gullies. So that's where you can't really see them, unfortunately, under the blue very well, unless you're really, really close up to it. So what this shows you is where do our gullies exist relative to the places where there is the highest level, the highest risk of surface flooding. Now, we've also got another data set on there, which is the green blobs. The green blobs are tree canopies. One of the big problems we have with gully maintenance is leaf fall, blocking our gullies. So you can kind of see right in the middle there, we've got perfect storm of high flood risk and a lot of tree canopies in there. So that's somewhere where we would know, well, we're either going to have to put more gullies in there, we're going to have to go out and be prepared to jet out and do regular maintenance on the gullies a lot more often than in some of the other areas where there isn't such a high flood risk. So that just shows you where we're going to be able to combine different data sources in ways that we've never done before. So yeah, how are we going to deliver it? I think I've touched on some of the main parts of it. We'll continue doing the reactive and planned and so on maintenance as we always have done, but we will be looking to plan our maintenance over a several-year period rather than just going from one year to the next. And we'll also be looking to improve the HIAMP as new ideas and new technologies emerge, and improve how we actually go about doing our maintenance, potentially using different materials and so on as they emerge. Just briefly touching on the finance side of things, I think I've already covered this off a little bit earlier on, but this kind of shows you the sorts of challenges that we face, where what that shows, the bars show TfL contributions for principal road maintenance over the last, over the last 10 years. And you can see it's pretty obvious that it's not keeping up remotely. It's dropped drastically. And obviously with all that's going on at TfL at the moment, we're not expecting things to improve anytime soon. So I'm conscious I'm possibly going a bit longer than I meant to. In terms of the delivery, this is one thing that's really important, is the communications and engagement part. I think I mentioned earlier the amount of casework we get, and having these sorts of graphics will enable us to better explain to the public why we make the investment choices that we make. But also, one of the things that we do want to do as part of this is to use members and use your local knowledge to help inform us in terms of where you think, based on your local knowledge, where you think we should be spending money. And obviously we'll need to balance that with the engineering need, the things that are coming out of the high amp, but it will hopefully bring us to a much more nuanced approach to where we invest our scarce funds. So the next steps then, we hope to have completed the technical aspects of developing the high amp by the beginning of the next financial year, so that's by March 25. I think there will then need to be some further work about how that is then used to inform the maintenance program for 25-26. That's something we'll have to develop. Unfortunately, it's a shame we didn't start doing the high amp a bit earlier. But yeah, so that's the program we're working on. So that's all I was going to say about the high amp. I'm just going to pick up on the key highway structures, which I was asked to briefly mention. So Creek Road Bridge, we have completed the main decking works project in May. As you can see from the photographs, that pretty much shows that. Before and after photographs, the top one, you can see that the carriageway was in a pretty poor condition back then compared to how it is right now in the bottom photograph. We've also completed the footway resurfacing in August. And some of you may have been aware that we were facing a legal claim dating back to 2021 when, for various reasons, we weren't able to lift the bridge because it's a lifting bridge. I can't go into the details of how that has been resolved because it's commercially sensitive, but I can say that it has been resolved, and we think we probably got a much better result than we potentially could have got. On Petman Crescent, the major deck repairs were completed nearly a year ago, last January. Major project with huge potential for disruption just because of the strategic nature of where it is. It's, you know, the main connection out to Thamesmead, for example, with a major bus station there as well. That was successfully completed with minimal disruption back in January. And hopefully we will not have to do any significant works to the structure for about another 25 years. That also applies to Creek Road Bridge, where other than just standard inspections and maintenance, we should not have to do any significant works there for another 20 or 25 years. Finally, on the foot tunnels, so we're in the middle of a lift repairs program. We completed refurbishment of the 2 lifts in the Greenwich Tunnel. I think that was back in 23. We are in the process. We've designed up the the repairs and refurbishments for 2 of the Woolwich lifts. As you know, the north lift has been out of service for a very long time. At the moment, we're just trying to agree with Newham the legal agreements to make sure that they pay us for their share, because everything in the Woolwich Tunnel, all the costs are supposed to be split evenly between us and Newham. So we're just trying to, we've got in principle agreement to that, so it's just a matter of figuring out the legals. And we hopefully will be doing that in the next few months. And separate to that, we have been exploring potential long-term upgrade options with TfL, but obviously there is those to do a full update and upgrade of both tunnels is a multi-million-pound project. So that is something that we're going to have to seek TfL support for. I think that's it. So does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, thank you very much for that. That was really detailed. So, yeah, we'll open it up to questions. I'll suggest maybe we do majority questions first, and then for the second round, we'll do any specifics on the Creekside Bridge, Petman Crescent, or the foot tunnels, but keep them for sort of a second round specific. But Charlie, do you want to go, or Councillor Davis?
Yeah, I'm happy to go first. That was really fascinating. Thank you for that presentation. And I think having a more sort of data-driven approach is always a good thing. I've made a couple of notes from things you mentioned, but one thing for me is obviously a focus of this is buy-in with the public. As part of that, is the plan to share those dashboards quite widely with the public so they can really see what is, going into each decision, the issues that there have been in their area, why a particular area is being focused on. So is that a focus there? And then given the move towards, I guess, using this as a way of encouraging modal shift, I think one thing that we probably all find in all of our wards is that quite often the issue can be that the public realm isn't particularly friendly to walking and other forms of modal. So I guess obviously if there's maintenance required, it's easier to address those things. But where there isn't maintenance required, or where the maintenance requirements are much lower, what can the council do to help to improve that public realm and ensure that residents are encouraged to take those different forms of travel? Sure.
So we haven't agreed exactly when or how we would share this with the public. I think that what we initially conceived is the idea that we would initially share this information with members and use you as representatives of the public. And so we would share this with you as part of what we've called a nominations process, where what we would seek to do is every year to be able to set out in advance, this is where we're going to be doing planned maintenance this year. And we would set out the reasons why, based on some of the data that I've presented here, and then we would invite your comments on that, and we would invite you, and so we would be sharing all of this data with you to allow you to be able to make informed, to see why we're making certain recommendations. You could then advise us as, well, hang on, your surveys, that your information is based on wrong. Here's the reason why you need to perhaps think of something else. Or we've missed out, we've talked about schools, we've talked about places of worship, and them all forming part of the hierarchy. There might be things that we haven't identified that some sort of important community facilities. And so that we definitely will be sharing this information with members. We will probably then share the information with the public after the decision has been made as to these are the roads we're going to do maintenance on this year. And so that would be kind of, providing the justification for why we're doing what we're doing. Regarding your modal shift point, I think that where this will feed into it, it's not, obviously this is about maintenance, you've already said that. But I think that through the information that we're going to be gathering, and because we're going to be comparing, we are going to be looking to, well, I've already said it's fundamental to the HIAP that we're capturing our strategic objectives, and our strategic objectives, obviously modal shift is a high part of that. And so I think that what this will do is this will shed light on, because we're going to be bringing those two things together, maintenance and objectives, which has never been done before. So this will start to shed a light on where those things are clashing and where those things aren't matching up. And so whilst it goes beyond being a maintenance responsibility, I think it will help us to identify where we need to take actions outside of just the pure maintenance activity to improve things for the public.
No, that's great. I think the only thing I'd add on sort of the data point, sharing it with members sounds great, and I'm sure we'd all spend days on end lost diving into the Power BI and looking at different elements. I think there's a real opportunity there as well to, share it with Greenwich cyclists, share it with different groups in the community. And I think by taking that approach, I think you could get some really innovative ideas that aren't just limited to members and officers, but mean that we can bring forward, real changes and be at the forefront of doing interesting things, from involving the wider community in having access to that data too. Yeah,
no, that's a really interesting idea, actually.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Councillor Littlewood.
Cool. Thank you. Thanks again for the presentation. I want to talk a bit more about delivery partners. So you mentioned there's term maintenance contractors, for example. So could you talk a bit more about how those contractors are selected and their role? But secondly, I imagine there's other partners we need the help of as well, like Thames Water and TfL, perhaps organisations we've got a bit less control over. So how do you make sure that they deliver so we can meet our targets?
Well, the term maintenance contract, so we appointed our new term maintenance contractor last year. It's Marlborough Highways. They went through a very detailed procurement exercise. They were chosen from, I can't remember exactly how many bidders we had, but we had all of the major highways conglomerates did bid for our term maintenance contract. Marlborough Highways, who you probably wouldn't have heard of before because they're not a really big name, but they're actually now active in several London boroughs. A lot of the reason why we appointed them was obviously price, that goes without saying, but they had a track record of really, really high performance and high levels of satisfaction in the boroughs in which they were already working. They also had a really significant social value offer in terms of what they could do for our public over and above just the basic doing highways maintenance for us. So that's why they were selected. Now, so far the bulk of the work that they've been doing for us has been just because of the nature of when they were appointed. So they were appointed back in April. And most of the work that they've done since then has been, well, entirely maintenance, to be honest. So far, they've been doing a really good job, in spite of the fact that they're absolutely brand new to the Royal Borough. They've picked up really, really quickly. They've really engaged well with us in terms of the management processes that we're trying to implement. Really, really strict management processes on them. They've been really, really good at getting along with that. The first real kind of planned works program is happening right now. It's the West and East Greenwich project, which has not been without its hiccups. I understand there's some issues around signage, but that was more of a design issue. That was nothing to do with our contractor. So I can't remember exactly what the rest of your question was. I've talked a lot about the term contractor, but...
Yeah, thank you. So the second part was around partners such as Thames Water, TfL, who will need the cooperation of to meet our target. So how do we make sure that they deliver?
Yeah, well, we work a lot with both parties. I personally meet with TfL once a month, where we deal with all sorts of liaison issues, and yeah, and they are really good at dealing with us generally. It's unfortunate that because of their various financial issues, there is less funding coming out of them. However, they do work with us. We work with them. Like I said, I meet with them every month. And we're in the process of working with them in terms of putting together our LIP bid for funding for next year. And also my colleague Ash, who is our flood risk manager, he deals with Thames Water and all of the other Environment Agency and everyone else on daily basis. So we are very, very engaged with those other stakeholders.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Councillor Gardner.
Thank you very much, John. I'm pleased about the move to more data-based and platform, and that we will be informed and the discussion with us in terms of local priorities. I think I've read the full report, and I think I've got a few questions, but my main concern actually follows on from what Councillor Davis was saying, that there doesn't seem, although we asked for a report which included pavements, in the report pavements isn't really mentioned. I mean, you mentioned it in the presentation, but with the London priority of having 80% of people moving by by sustainable travel by 2035, and our priority to reduce car journeys by 45% by 2030, what are we doing to actually inculcate that within our asset management strategy? We have one of the, per square kilometre, per person, we have one of the highest length of road networks. I can think of regional sort of places where we could either close roads totally or reduce the road space and increase the public realm or greenery and so forth, put in cycle lanes. Loads of places where we can do that. I can name around the borough, just as other boroughs have been doing very imaginatively, but this isn't in. Therefore, we could reduce the amount of forward maintenance we need to do, but there's no programme to reduce heat, the heat island effect of tarmac and so forth around the borough, which fits in with our overall transport strategy and public realm strategy. That doesn't seem to be part of this asset management review. We don't seem to be taking the opportunities. So that's a key question for me, is how can we ensure that's included? And within that, my second point was how do we address, and I mentioned this to you before, the 2-metre London pavement standard. So if we're doing a renewable road and we've got narrow parts of pavements, you obviously want to reduce road spaces and car parking spaces and increase the pavement space in order to promote active travel, as Councillor Davis said, make it more easier and safer for people to walk or take their buggy or whatever. And then moving on, I wondered about sorry, I'm trying to read my writing, decluttering. Maybe that's separate from asset management, but we've got very good Historic England and lots of other bodies, CABE as they used to be. TfL have very, very good guidance on decluttering and reducing the amount of street furniture. We don't seem to listen to that very much. And is this part of the asset management review where we can actually reduce the number of needless poles all around the place, which will reduce cluttering, again making it more attractive and safer? And yeah, how does that fit in all that? How does it fit into healthy streets? We went down yet again on the Healthy Street scorecard. We're now in the bottom half in London. Obviously, we want to turn that around and be right at the top. So how does that fit into the strategy as well? Finally, money obviously is an issue, which is why I'm keen that we prioritise active travel, which obviously includes bus routes as well and cycle routes. But are we leveraging as effectively as we can and strategically planning applications and major developments to ensure we improve the neighbouring public realm and streetscape. I can think of many planning applications come up when I've been sitting on the planning board and asked and said, oh, well, our highways people didn't ask for anything there. There's been no discussion about it. It's just, you've just got to deal with what's within the domain rather than the impact that that major new development, whatever type of a commercial or residential development is going to have on the streetscape. Are we maximising that? And are we maximising it in terms of Section 106 agreements? And effectively, strategically, rather than expediently, leveraging those agreements to improve the public realm and supplement the rather meagre income stream that you have to work with?
Probably not the answer you're going to want to hear, but I mean, an awful lot of that does go way beyond the remit of the HIAMP. However, the HIAMP is going to be the first time that we've tried to tie maintenance into our strategic objectives, as I've already explained. It is going to provide information that will allow us to join up some of the things that you've mentioned around if we're going to do, so for example, we've got our network hierarchy that I showed you earlier. We could start to use that network hierarchy. Let's say we've got a street that's high on the network hierarchy because of it's got lots of schools or place of worship or things like that. It's got high pedestrian footfall. We will then be able to compare that, you know, if that street comes up and that needs maintenance done on it, then maybe we should be thinking about doing something different there. So we're at early stages with the HIAMP. We're just developing it as a tool. It's not going to be available to us until April next year. And then I think we'll have to figure out what tunes we're going to play with it, because we've already identified the obvious asset need, or how it's going to improve how we approach, how we maintain assets. What you're talking about is obviously incredibly valid. It's not the reason why we started doing the HIAMP, but it is a benefit that can come out of the HIAMP. So I think it's worthwhile that it's good that you've raised this as an issue, because it is something that, you know, like I said, it wasn't what we initially considered achieving, but it is something that is now going to be possible. So all I can say is that it's not something that we are able to do right now, but certainly this will facilitate us in doing this in future. And I think that goes ditto for pavement widths and decluttering. The problem with pavement widths and decluttering, things like that, is that they, and again, obviously I'm highways and traffic, and so I deal with maintenance. I don't identify new schemes. But the HIAMP would help us to identify new schemes. Clearly, they would fall outside of maintenance, because if you do things like changing pavement widths, not decluttering, but certainly changing pavement widths, then generally you're going to have to do a large consultation exercise, which falls, if you're going to be changing curb lines, you're normally going to have to do some form of consultation exercise, which isn't really what we deal with as part of maintenance. But again, this will help us to identify where those things could be done. With regards to the planning application side, I mean, that obviously does go quite far outside of the realms of the HIAMP. Although I do understand what you're saying, within highways and traffic, you may be aware that we're currently going through a reorganization. And as part of that reorganization, our team that deals with planning applications is going to go from sort of 1.5 people up to 3 people. So we're hoping that we're going to be in a much better position to respond in the sorts of ways that you suggest to planning applications. And also, I think we have a view that what we want to do, once we're better resourced up, what we should be able to do in future is, currently because we don't have the resource, very often we ask developers to do works that, under Section 278 agreements, works that we would actually prefer to do ourselves. Because if we took them over, took the money, designed them up to suit our benefits rather than what the developer wants, then we would be in a better position to design something that is more like what we would want to see. Previously, we have not been in a position to do that because of lack of resource. However, that is something that I think we will move towards doing in future. I've talked with our term contractor about this. They do this type of work in lots of other boroughs. So, like I said, it goes beyond the scope of what I'm here to talk about today. But it is these are things we are moving in that direction. In dealing specifically with Section 106s, we have recently, or we're close to completing a piece of work where we have reviewed Section 106s, unspent Section 106s from across the borough, spanning numerous years. And we have identified a sum, certainly in the hundreds of thousands, of unspent Section 106 funds, which we're now looking to reallocate so that we can spend on other high priority schemes elsewhere in the borough, safety schemes and so on. So that work is still ongoing. It's nearing completion. We will have to jump through some hoops because there's going to be a bit of work to be done with our legal team, persuading them that we can, because there are legal agreements around Section 106s, persuading them that we can vary some of those legal agreements. But that is a piece of work that is ongoing, and we hope to conclude that in the next few months.
I'll just come back. I wasn't suggesting we should vary legal agreements. I'd be very worried if you were starting to do that in relation to the unspent Section 106 in my ward. Because clearly, the Section 106 are there to deal with the impact and mitigate the impact of that particular development.
Just to pick up on that.
Still is different, obviously. Yeah.
No, I absolutely agree. Just to pick up on that, we're identifying things like a Section 106 that, say it was for a junction improvement, but then that junction improvement was done as part of some other scheme, and so it never had to be spent. Or it's a scheme where we had a certain amount of money. So a Section 106 as opposed to a Section 278 agreement. Section 106 is a fixed sum of money. And so it could be that we agreed a Section 106 agreement, we agreed an amount, we went out and did the work, and there's still some money left over. In most cases, and I speak from experience of numerous other London boroughs, in most cases the developers aren't really geared up for taking that money back again. And so it's easier for them to just write it off, obviously depending on the actual amount. But generally, and we're working with a consultant on this who I've worked with previously, and she has extensive experience of doing this in other local boroughs. So we're not doing anything. Obviously, we have to consult with our legal people, but we're not going to be doing anything that's going to be at all risky, because if you've dealt with our legal people, they are very risk averse. It's their job. So we're not going to be doing anything that's at all suspect in that respect.
Thank you so much. I've got a few extra questions, but I think it's great to hear about how the work is going to interact with kind of other departments and kind of push forward work in the future. I think it's all kind of like very encouraging. So a few slightly smaller ones. So one kind of on in terms of like flared junctions, if that's something that we're looking at in terms of like sort of slowly withdrawing. If we're thinking in terms of how it obviously pedestrians walk further if you've got flare junctions, and also you have cars who are like might take angles more quicker.
Yeah.
So if that's something that we can kind of, as part of the asset management, we're kind of considering sort of phasing those out to more like 90-degree angle, which may increase kind of like public realm etc. And the second one is kind of around sometimes when you were sort of seeing, occasionally you're seeing sort of unprotected cycle lanes in the borough where they're sort of painted along, which I think the evidence would suggest is like kind of can be more dangerous. How are these being commissioned, or why are these being commissioned over more kind of protected cycle lanes? And then the third one, a very small one about the gullies that you mentioned, which is quite interesting. The picture you had is of my ward. I knew I recognised it like very well. But is it extending to the grates, and how are you sort of how are you deciding what's kind of high risk of those, other than just through the mapping, I presume? But
well, the mapping and also gathering records on complaints and when we have to go out. So the gullies get blocked up and we have to go and jet them out. Basically get full of silt and leaf fall and all this kind of stuff. So the road can't drain properly, the road floods. We obviously get people complaining about it and we have to go down and rectify it. So what we'll be doing is we'll be doing a much better job of collecting and collating that data. And so I've forgotten the exact regime by which we do, I think we jet every gully out once a year. I think that's our standard regime. But what we'd be looking to do is in response to frequent flooding events, in response to things like that mapping that I showed you, we would change our regime of maintenance where we've identified certain high-risk locations. We'll jet them out routinely twice a year or 3 times a year. And maybe in other locations where the risk is really low, where there's been very, very little evidence of flooding in the past, we'll jet them out a bit less, just to, so we can keep the total spend the same, but make sure that spend is targeted in places where we know there's a high risk and that we've got observations and evidence that flooding regularly occurs. Does that answer?
Yeah, no, that's great. Do you have any thoughts about the fled junctions or the...
Yeah, I mean, again, that goes beyond maintenance. However, I think I certainly personally agree with you absolutely that, in fact, I'm working with the people in our planning and strategy team, Alexi, who's managing a project there, where we are looking at exactly that, where I think there has historically been an approach from highways engineers in the past where you design to a certain standard, just certain standard, you apply that all the time. I personally don't agree with that approach. I believe that you should be designing to improve things for pedestrians and cyclists all the time. That should be at the core of what you do. And certainly reducing flares on junctions, it slows traffic speeds down as they go in and out of the junction. It makes them much easier for pedestrians to cross as well. So that's something I personally am all in favour of, 100%.
What I might do is move to some questions on the Creekside Bridge and Petman Crescent and foot tunnels, if anyone has them. I have some specific questions about foot tunnels from other councillors who've sent them through, but unless you want to... Yes, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, this actually came up at a recent planning board application. There's a new development. I always forget what it's called, whether it's Plumstead or West Thamesmead or Pippa will know. They're the Berkeley and Peabody development, which is beginning to go up. And we've had lots of applications in front of the planning board. And I keep thinking, Petman Crescent should not be there. TfL have gone round the capital replacing their gyratories. This is a huge gyratory full of low value, apart from the bus garage, obviously very important, but it's full of low value sort of, shops and big car parks and so forth. It's a huge gyratory that's got far too much capacity, which is pedestrian unfriendly, cycle unfriendly. It shouldn't be a gyratory. We're taking out gyratories everywhere. So why are we focused on mending the current gyratory rather than taking out and therefore uniting that new development either side of Petman Crescent? Surely there needs to be a far more radical approach. I mean, my general concern is that the asset management strategy is all to do with repairing what's there. I think you just said this yourself, rather than trying to make the changes that we need to meet the new priorities. But Pembroke Crescent's a very good example of that. No one ever would build a gyratory like that now. It's something back from the 1960s or 70s. And surely that needs to be addressed to unite that new development and build that linkage with Plumstead High Street and Thamesmead and so forth. It is a real monster.
Unfortunately, this is where I give you another disappointing answer, because this does sit outside of my area. I know from dealing with colleagues in what is now the program and strategy team, I think they're now called, where new projects like that sit there. And I know that they are looking at some projects in Petman Crescent around improving cycling through the Crescent. I honestly don't know if there is any, if there is currently any project that's being looked at to remove the gyratory, as you say. So unfortunately, I'm not really in a position to give you a good answer on that. I recognise the point you're making, of course, though.
Thank you very much. I think I might ask questions about the foot tunnels that have been sent through from two other councillors who represent those areas. But if there's any that you can't answer, we can take them after the meeting.
Sure.
But so the first, particularly with the Greenwich foot tunnel one first, at sort of a previous meeting of ours, it was indicated there was a joint meeting happening between Tower Hamlets, TfL and ourselves to discuss the long-term regeneration. And just has that meeting taken place? And if so, if anything can be shared from that meeting. And then the sort of second question is about the lifts that I think sort of obviously still unreliable, weren't working this evening. But repairs seem to have become more efficient in the last year than they were previously. And is that partly to do with us having access to spare parts or staffing? If you can give sort of any explanation for that. And I think in previous years, the unusual shape of those lifts has been given as the kind of reason for many of the problems, and is as a full kind of replacement for a more sort of like tube station lift. Is that something that is being thought about? I think I'll start with those. There's more, but we'll see how we go with those ones.
Oh, right. Sorry, I was looking at my response to your first question. That response I've just written not yet, and I was trying to remember what your question was, but it was relating to the Greenwich Tunnel and meeting with Tower Hamlets. What's happened on that is that our lead or structures engineer, he's been dealing with his equivalent in Tower Hamlets. I've asked him to set up a meeting, sort of an officer level meeting, so that I can discuss with my equivalent in Tower Hamlets what his feel for the current political stance is likely to be in Tower Hamlets, because I know that in the past they've had different views from us with regards to things like cycling in the lifts or in the tunnels, and to get an understanding of where they sit. And I think what we'd envisage doing is having those discussions and then bringing that back to members for them to give us a view on how they feel we should proceed. Because obviously anything like this is going to be super expensive, and it's only going to be achievable through sort of the political union between both boroughs. So at an officer level, all that we can do is gather the information and then feed that up to you guys, for you guys to make a decision. And so that I have asked my structures engineer to set that meeting up. With regards to the lifts, the Greenwich lift, so we've got a long-term maintenance program around the lifts. The Greenwich lifts were refurbished in 2023, which will be why they're more reliable. As I said, the Woolwich Tunnel lifts, we are hoping to work on them start working on them in the next few months. We just need a legal agreement with Newham, London Borough of Newham, for them to guarantee that they will reimburse our costs. We have the designs done. We have the specialist manufacturer of those parts, which relates to your other point about the lifts themselves, and they are they're obviously bespoke, very unusual. We have discussed looking at those, but that would require significant amendments to the insides of the shafts, which is going to be another pricey option. So what we are doing is we have a project which should have been completed by now, but hopefully will complete by the end of the financial year. We have a project. So firstly, we're doing the refurbishment of the Woolwich lifts, and that should make them a lot more reliable for the next X number of years. We are also towards the end of a project where what we're doing is we're trying to collect live data from the lifts in both tunnels where I know a fault has occurred, I think, in one of the lifts tonight, but what we will be doing is putting the software in place where the operational status of the lifts will be automatically communicated onto our website. So that in itself obviously isn't going to improve the reliability of the lifts, but it will at least let the public, give them easy access to information about the status of the lifts so they can plan their journeys accordingly.
Brilliant. So the work on the Woolwich lifts is expected to start in the next few months and would probably be completed next year sometime.
It should. I think it will take. Well, I mean, once we've got the funding agreement in place, I think it's about a 3-month project.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. There's two other sort of questions connected to the lifts. One is sort of the 2018 signage for a cycle scheme that's still kind of up on the Greenwich lift, around the Greenwich lifts, and that it maybe just needs to be removed. It was for a trial cycling scheme that has never happened or wasn't going to happen. So maybe that's more of a maybe action to remove the confusing signage. And then the other one about great news about the idea of having live updates going onto the website. Is there some kind of work that's going to be done about the LED signage? So, sometimes when you get to the lifts and they will say that, or the tunnel will say, oh, this lift is open at the north end, and actually you get to the north end and it's not open. Is there some kind of work being done about connecting those LED signs outside the tunnels?
I think that is part of it, because we've got, as part of certainly that will be part of what will be done in the Woolwich Tunnel as part of that refurb. I would need to speak with the project manager for that just to get definite details.
Brilliant. If you're happy with us to follow up with you about that, that's great. Yeah. Okay, brilliant. Is there any other questions? I'll let you go, and thank you very much for your time.
Well done. Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you very much.
Not a question, but I don't know whether we can make a recommendation based on our discussions and hopefully what John said, and that is that the panel would want the asset management plan to use every opportunity to improve our pavements and cycling and bus times to promote safer, attractive travel and healthy streets. If people are happy with that, it's how we, so when you're looking at the weighting of the different priorities, that you bear that in mind.
I'd agree with that. And if we could just add the point that we've made as well around sharing the information that is coming out of the plan, the Power BI, with as wide a group as possible and as many stakeholders as possible as 2 recommendations. I think they'd be useful. Yeah, we won't include them, but yeah, that's great. Correct. Thank you very much. Cheers.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. So we're moving to item 6, which is on the 10-year regeneration plan, 2024 to 2034. And thank you for your patience waiting. So I think, Emma, you wanted to start with some comments, and then we'll open it up to questions after that.
Great. So just do a very quick sort of introduction to the paper. So the paper updates Scrutiny on the 10-year regeneration plan, focusing on 4 areas: the Charlton Riverside and the urban frameworks for Woolwich, Plumstead and Abbeywood. Taking the frameworks first, these frameworks set out a vision and identify where intervention is needed and opportunities have not come forward on their own. So with those, officers have been developing the commission briefs with internal council departments and setting up a steering group to ensure that that involvement is sustained throughout the development of the frameworks. Also aligning with planning policy to ensure that the development of the local plan can be informed and supported by those frameworks. And just to note that changes to the Procurement Act have meant that the commissioning has been subject to some new processes which have been much slower than expected. And then for Charlton Riverside, 2 consultant teams have been commissioned, one design-focused and the other providing commercial advice. These commissions are coming to an end in the early part of next year. And that project has also secured £486,000 of external funding from Homes England. That's it.
That's great. Thank you very much. And I mean, overall, I think it's really encouraging to see this kind of vision coming forward for these areas and like the future of it. So it's all great to see. I know it's early days within the plan as well. But we'll open up to questions from the panel. Councillor Gardner, if you want to.
Thank you very much. I've read the welcome to your role. I've read the report. I'm obviously, part of my ward covers Charlton Riverside, and I know all of Charlton Riverside very well. And was quite involved in a different way in both previous master plans. But as a councillor, no one has talked to me about, I mean, sometimes I've vented my views at these sorts of forums, but no one has come and talked to me. So you've got all the other external stakeholders, no doubt talking to developers and landowners, but no one's talking to councillors, or indeed local amenity and community groups or business groups and so forth. So, you know, and we are the ward champions, and we do know our wards inside out. So I wonder why that is, why there's that lack of communication with ward councillors, because the fundamental issue that I've raised before in Charlton Riverside is that the focus has hitherto, I mean, the brilliant vision for, you know, the type of sort of eco-village that fits seamlessly in with the rest of the historic Charlton. But it was all focused on the eastern side, whereas the western side is this retail nightmare, and some industrial land which is useful, like Margaret's Quarter, and some which is less useful. But it's a car, you know, heat island full of car parks, and that can really change if we get the framework right, and therefore you can spread the development and therefore reduce the intense development and density pressure on the eastern side by spreading it onto the western side as well. But that's basically what I'm gearing, but no one's talked to me or my colleagues about it and wondered why there was that deficiency.
So we have widened the scope, so I think some of your concerns there have been addressed in the initial piece of work that we've been doing, but we've been trying to, I suppose, get to a point where the plan is formulated as such to give people confidence that it will come forward, noting that the previous SPD didn't. So I suppose that's really what that void of communication has been regarding. I don't know if you want to add anything else to that, Jeremy.
Well, yeah, I think it's a really good question, and I think we're aware that there needs to be some wider discussion and engagement about the work that's been done to date. So I think that's a key thing for us in the new year. I think part of the difficulty to date has been around some of the commercial sensitivities of some of the landowners, because if we reveal too much too soon. It reveals a position for some of the landowners. So we've been quite cautious, possibly too cautious. And we had some conversations, Emma and I, some dialogue with Brenda Taggart as well this week around the whole need to get back out and talk to people. So I think that's a point well made, and it's something that we'll definitely take away and talk to Majid about in terms of the programme going forward.
Could I just ask another question? One of the key, this applies to all the development areas. I mean, I'm not just thinking of Charlton Riverside, but the others as well. The challenge, the big challenge we're facing at the moment is, on the one hand, we have all these huge pressures, the tilted balance and everything, to deliver homes. But although the plans that are coming forward from developers, many of whom are just speculators and just try and get the planning permission, then sell it on, and land bank, the pressure we're getting from developers is for sort of more student accommodation, shared living accommodation, build to rent, very generally very much on the small side, and only social housing if you've actually really bottomed it out and talked to them, as we did obviously with the Kidbrooke regeneration, or Arsenal we're doing with the lot more, the new belt, whatever the new one is anyway, in Plumstead. But there are so many other developments which are just not coming forward with a decent amount, if any, in some cases, social housing. And our whole development is based on meeting housing need of the borough, but also obviously ensuring we meet our policy ambition, the London Plan policy ambition of mixed development, which we're just getting less and less now. So how will the plans, the regeneration plan, take account of that for all the opportunity areas?
I think we're very much wanting to meet that mixed tenure housing development, and recognise that developers are starting to present these more transient types of units or homes. That certainly isn't our intention to be supporting that in its entirety.
Can I add to that? Again, Councillor Gardner, I recognise what you're saying, and as Emma said, a lot of those developments encourage a transient population, which has a knock-on effect in terms of community and social infrastructure. And it's not meeting our local housing need. And that's a real cause for concern. The root of the problem is an economic viability problem created as a result of land economics, and a planning system that is so desperate to get numbers that it doesn't allow for the more qualitative things that we know we need. And I think one of the things the urban regeneration frameworks can do to assist is by dealing with or identifying clearly what the council's ambition and vision is and its reasons for that, and by setting out how some of the barriers to development can be overcome. So there's an ask of government or the GLA or TfL, as you asked about the gyratory earlier. You know, there are a number of things that the frameworks can set out as things that we need to take forward as programmes of work that we can't just solve on our own as a council, but need to be part of the lobby to central government and the GLA as appropriate, or Homes England as appropriate. So, but it does start with that vision and that real idea about, well, actually what is right for our communities, and crystallising that. And the local plan needs to develop policies that, obviously it needs to be in conformity with central government guidance, but it needs to develop policies around things like the student housing and the build to rent.
Yeah, Councillor Davies.
Thank you, Chair. It's been really interesting so far, thank you. The areas covered within the report, obviously the previous government had quite a keen interest in development at those areas, and the new government has made planning and delivering homes top of its agenda, what engagement have we had so far on the government's interest in these areas discussed? And then the other question I had was a lot of the area that we're talking about now, I imagine is also covered by the estate regeneration strategy that we discussed at the last meeting, what feels like only yesterday, but a lot of it will be covered there. And so how are we going to make sure that those two documents work together, basically?
Shall I do the estates one first? So estate regeneration also sits under me and my team, so the teams are working together. So being able to kind of identify where those opportunities are starting to present themselves and how that fits into the urban framework. Hopefully that's as connected as we can be. And then government interest, I would say that is solely been focused on Charlton Riverside at this moment. We've had lots of interest from both MHCLG and the GLA.
Yeah, and to add to that, Homes England, who, as you know, are a government agency who normally work outside London, but the GLA, particularly in relation to Charlton, have said Homes England. So we've done quite a lot with Homes England, but the balance might be shifting back to the GLA. We don't know, and that's one of the difficulties. And as you know, the other big growth area not covered by an urban framework, because there's an opportunity area planning framework, is Thamesmead. And the big discussion there is with Homes England and TfL about the DLR extension. So that's the kind of big area for government discussion.
No, that's great. Thank you both so much. And it's positive to hear that there is that engagement, especially in Charlton Riverside. And then I guess just final point on the estate regeneration and the urban framework would be, do you envisage that estate regeneration will play a significant part in that urban framework and the regeneration here going forward as well?
I think where the areas overlap, absolutely, yes.
Yes, Abbey Wood's a good example, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where there is some real opportunity there to do. So that's where Emma would identify in the framework there is an opportunity to do estate regeneration, and then as part of the estate regeneration programme have gathered the data and analysis about why those estates need investment and how that might work. So yeah, very much so.
Thanks, Councillor Littlewood.
Cool, thank you. So I'm looking at the engagement section. And of course, it's immensely important to involve the local community and other stakeholders like GLA, TfL members and so on. So this is absolutely right. But if I look at someone like Woolwich Arsenal, where there's going to be so much change over the next, well, just few years, let alone 10 years, do we need to be more ambitious about the stakeholders we're engaging? Because I'm sure there are, because we want to attract new businesses. There's an enormous amount of money being spent by developers and by redoing the high street and so on. Should we be trying to think ahead? Are we doing, say, opportunity scanning? Are we looking at what new stakeholders we can bring in and make sure we get them at a very early stage? Because I'm sure there are stakeholders who might be looking at Woolwich today who perhaps weren't just 12 or 24 months ago, and I'm sure that will change again in the next 3, 5, 10 years. Thank you.
Yes, I think that's a great suggestion, and we are certainly trying to raise the profile and show sort of the ambition, I suppose, that we do have, certainly for Woolwich. So once we've, I suppose, secured some of our plans, there will be much more marketing around what the places are going to be like, what the vision for those places would be, and what businesses might be attracted to the spaces within them.
And if I can add to that, if I may, not in my area, but in Michelle Rankin as Assistant Director of Economic and Business, she's been doing a reorganisation and has appointed somebody, and one of the focuses is on inward investment, and so it's identifying what's our story of Woolwich as a place, what's its DNA, what makes it so special, what is unique about it, and what are then the opportunities, and alongside the urban framework, and where the urban framework can say things about that, whereas a planning policy can't, it will start to say, well, yeah, who and where is the target market, and who are the people we're engaging with to go out and meet that market. So some of the best advocates would be some of the existing business people and some of the communities that are already active here, being able to go out and talk to like-minded individuals and encourage them to come in. And that's partly why we're doing the framework, so we can really nail down those opportunity sites and the opportunities for more investment.
Thank you. Yeah, 'cause I suppose it's somewhat straightforward to talk to people who are already there, but much more difficult to kind of reach out and try and bring people in. So I just wanted to make sure that that was somewhere in the plan.
Thank you very much. Kind of final question from me is part of the aim of the urban regeneration frameworks is to revitalise an area's infrastructure and support public services. I'm just interested in how you're sort of joining those dots together, and maybe specifically around health infrastructure. If a lot of the areas we're talking about are going to see huge population increases, more pressures on GP surgeries, hospitals, etc. So I'm quite interested in how you sort of see this kind of policy framework joining public services in general, but kind of specifically with health infrastructure and how it might support that.
So the steering groups for the urban frameworks include public health and include some housing and other surrounding services, I suppose. So we're certainly starting to look at how built environment can support their future planning and horizon scanning for what those services start to look like.
I think as well, I mean, one of the things that's really difficult is to pin down what the health requirements are. So we've gone through phases. Charlton Riverside's a really good example that Councillor Gardner made before, you know, where at one time it was all about polyclinics and we need big space and we get lots. And then suddenly it's not about that. It's about more community-based and how do we... So that's the physical output of what the health needs are still needs refinement, which is why Emma's got them on the steering group, so we can begin to pin them down and make those fixed points. And then it's about, well, how do we get the funding into those services? Because, as you'll appreciate more than anyone as ward members, people are frustrated because the infrastructure comes afterwards. And actually some of this needs to be more immediate and upfront. And so we need to get into the NHS investment plans in terms of, you know, we will need a new health centre in location A, for instance, and get that investment plan. And again, that's why it's really important we do this urban regeneration framework work, so we can begin to nail those requirements down.
Questions from the... Sorry, Councillor.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, one of our overarching strategic priorities as a council is our carbon neutral target in 2030. So I'd just like you to unpack a bit how the 10-year regeneration package will help us meet that. In particular, obviously, given concrete produces 8% of global emissions, how we're going to reduce the use of concrete. Are we looking at timber and other forms of construction? Are we obviously looking to minimise the amount of demolition, which has a huge embedded carbon, and refurbish far more than demolish? And in terms of biodiversity, are we looking well beyond the statutory minimum of 10% biodiversity net gain? Are we looking to expand our green areas? Because many of them are in areas of, not all, but Charlton Riverside certainly is an area of green open space deficiency. And are we looking at the transport as well, which relates to our previous item? You know, the previous SPD was about downgrading Woolwich Road. It included Charlton Station to ensure we have a new integrated transport hub and so forth. It looked at safeguarding land for a future rapid transit, or hopefully one day a tram or something like that. Looked at piers for the, you know, all these things, car-free, a whole car-free vision for the area, taking out masses of road space, all those horrible parking spaces and so forth, and that forms a big heat island. Is that fundamental? I mean, not just I talk about Charlton Riverside because I know it better, but to the other development areas as well.
Yes, there's absolutely a drive to improve those sustainable transport modes and the opportunities for that, and reduce car ownership through zero car development. I think that will be fundamental to the success of certainly Charlton Riverside, but the others too. And lots of those items that you mentioned there are still part of that wider vision, I suppose, for Charlton Riverside. We haven't gone into that level of detail about what materials the buildings are made from yet, but there will certainly be a requirement to assess whether demolition is the right thing to do with the carbon frame.
Yeah, and I think on the biodiversity net gain, I agree with you in terms of, often when we talk about climate change, we talk about carbon reduction, but there's so much more environmental and natural capital that needs to happen. And biodiversity net gain is an example of that. And I think one of the things we've talked about with planning policy colleagues is, what's the biodiversity net gain of a blue solution instead of a green one, for instance. So water-based, you can get more biodiversity than you can in some of the green spaces. So we do want to get into that as part of the frameworks. And my least favourite subject is embedded carbon, because I've really struggled to understand it. But it is on our radar about, should you be demolishing things, and is it more effective to retrofit? But it's very complicated in buildings, as we found out, when you do some partial retrofit and not complete, because you change the building system. So, but that is all a key part of the estate regeneration piece. Do we and should we be demolishing things? And the environmental factor is a really key point. So thanks for making that. On transport, I do agree with you as well, and I think one of the things that's really hard is, and again, we've had the conversations with planning policy colleagues about the point you raised earlier about actually, should we be saying it's time to reclaim some of the streets because we're really meaning no more cars? And what does that actually mean? And should we take the space back? And I think there's a lot of work to do on that, an awful lot.
Sorry, Chair. There's another aspect, which, as we, Councillor Richard Cotton and I sit through planning boards, comes up again and again, and I'm sure will be a live issue on Charlton Riverside, and has been clearly a live issue on Woolwich Arsenal, and certainly in my ward, further up my ward, that is on the peninsula, is a very live issue, and that's housing mix and sustainability of housing. We face this real challenge to get the right housing mix and get sufficient family accommodation. And also to have the type of developments where families actually want to stay. Obviously some people will always want to move out to, big gardens and green fields and so forth, and that's fine, but more have to, because when they have a family, there's nowhere else for them to live locally, and maybe they just want a small garden or a communal garden or something. But are we looking at the evidence basis from previous developments, both in our borough and other boroughs, to see what sort of housing actually works? So the original vision of Charlton Riverside was sort of medium level, courtyard type things and so forth, which was just more attractive for families than high rise. But in my view, looking, at sort of GP, Greenwich Peninsula versus GMV, for example, and I wondered, are we looking at that evidence base to ensure we get a really sustainable communities, which is fundamental to the national planning policy framework? Because when it talks about sustainable communities, that being the presumption in favour of development, sustainable development, it doesn't just mean in terms of greenery and climate change, it means in terms of being sustainable as a community. And people, which means stickiness, people, not everyone obviously, because people always move, but people sticking around and feeling a sense of community and a sense of ownership. Is that sense of place, which in my ward is very different, say, between the GMV, which has a strong sense of place, and Greenwich Peninsula, which maybe it's early days, but it has a fairly low sense of place because of housing mix and so forth, and various other reasons, height and things like that. So are we looking at those lessons in terms of prescriptions for the future?
We're in the middle of a piece of work around sort of a visioning exercise, certainly for Charlton Riverside, where that's, I suppose, got a little bit more information behind it. Certainly we'll be looking for a sustainable housing mix and providing that lifetime home style of living, I suppose, but we haven't gone into that level of detail yet. So, but take your points.
I think one of the real problems we've got is the housing is a commodity and it's a market and it's about land economics, and that's what's driven so many of the solutions that we've ended up with. And actually, you know, fundamentally, there needs to be a bit of a rethink about how the whole land allocation and system goes, because people are speculating on land, and that isn't giving us the best products. But it's the system we've got to work with at the moment, and therefore we try to do our best within that system. We touched on it at the last scrutiny about how in Greenwich Builds we've tried to get a real mix of units with more adapted houses, specialist housing provided, some of the bigger units, but it is really hard. It is really difficult. And one of the things that we have to acknowledge is that London is still a much less dense city than its European counterparts, and that, you know, that creates a real issue for, you know, the government is talking about densification quite hard. And it's certainly the government's agencies are talking about densification. But I do agree, and I think we're all alive to the fact that, you know, if you just create a place which is full of 1 and 2 beds, then it's likely that it'll just be a stepping stone to something else, and that's not, as you say, sustainable in the longer term. In terms of mixed and balanced communities should be our objective.
Okay, thank you very much, guys. Thank you very much, Emma. We'll finish that item. That's brilliant. Yeah. And we'll move on to item 7, which is the capital projects update. And just for anybody watching online, I thought the way these 3 projects were selected, the list was sent to members, and members voted on the ones they wanted to hear more information about. So that's how we've got here. Did you want to sort of say some comments before, or we've read the report and we can go straight to questions, or what would you prefer?
I'm easy either way. I mean, I think the report's fairly self-explanatory, so I'm happy to jump straight to questions, or if members want me to do a brief summary of each project, I can do that too.
Should we go straight to questions, and we'll just take them in order? So we'll group the questions together by capital project, and then, so if we want to start with Birchmere's feasibility study, if any members have questions, or I have a few, if I can. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. And I must admit, I did read the other reports in full. I haven't quite read this one in full. So my apologies if it's already covered, Daniel. My big issue about Birchmere is that it's obviously every time another award decision comes up for electric vehicles, only 5.5% of the RPG fleet is electric. It should be fundamental that any refit of Birchmere has the capacity and the facilities for a 100% EV fleet that we're going to need for the future. Presumably we need a larger fleet as our population grows and so forth. And is that fully counted for in the programme for Birchmere? But also, are we going to see commensurately a vast reduction in the parking space for staff? So there'll be a very clear presumption that staff will cycle, walk, get the bus or train. It's not that far from Plumstead Station. And have we got the public's transport infrastructure to go with that, the cycling infrastructure and so forth. So it's not so much about the physical building, which I'm sure is brilliant, but around the electrical infrastructure for charging for the council fleet and ensuring that staff based at Birchmere don't drive there, other than obviously to use the council electric vehicles.
Sure. So you'll be pleased to know that the electrification piece is a central pillar of the project, and in fact that's part of the reason why we're doing it. So just a brief whistle-stop tour. So the site is getting close to capacity. As you say, the fleet is growing as population grows, as developments come forward, the fleet needs to get bigger, more houses to repair, more bins to empty, for example. So the site's coming to capacity, so we need to rethink the site, and at the same time we need to prepare it for EV. So there's an EV strategy in place for the site at the moment. So the project will absolutely be about how do we create a site that fits with EV, and if we've got to reconfigure it in order to create the capacity needed on site, we need to do the electrification at the same time. Now that's a big investment, as I'm sure you can imagine. Electric vehicles are far more expensive than CI vehicles, but you know that investment needs to be made because that's what the council is committed to deliver. Whether we'll ever achieve 100% electrification, I think remains to be seen. RCVs, refuse collection vehicles, 100% electric are challenging. I know we've had some vehicles on test down there and they've been problematic. So whether that heavy goods vehicle part of the industry goes fully EV remains to be seen. But of course, we'll prepare for that and the site will be prepared for that. So that's absolutely a fundamental piece. The other piece around staff parking is more challenging. The site is not well served by public transport. There is a bus that goes there that comes from Woolwich. However, a lot of the staff live in Kent and public transport from that direction is not easy. So a number of staff do travel by car at the moment. We're currently analysing that actually in the project. So the feasibility study will do a full transport analysis. That work hasn't concluded yet, but we'll make sure we do that analysis in the report and consider how best to do that modal shift of staff transport as much as we can. But I think we have to recognise there'll be an element, I think, of vehicle travel to that site because of its location. We'll also be looking at electrification for staff vehicles too.
If I could just follow on from that, then if there was a real issue with transport, I think the 472 goes that way, doesn't it? Because I've got it when I've gone to Birchmere. But if they're coming from Kent, then surely they can use the rail lines into Abbey Wood or Plumstead or Woolwich. And couldn't we organise a minibus or something to take people from the nearest station that they're going to, whether it's Abbey Wood or Woolwich or whatever, to Birchmere? Have we, thought this through strategically? Because it's not just about achieving the modal shift. It's also about people being healthy, our workforce being healthy, but it's also about our optimal use of the space at Birchmere, because we want the space to be used for productively and for the EV charging for our growing fleet and so forth, not for as a car park for staff.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I do agree with you. As I said, we're doing a transport assessment, which will be looking at staff source and destination data. So where are they coming from, how they're travelling. We haven't concluded that work yet, so it will look at all of that analysis and work out what is the best option for the site. I think the other challenges with the site is the shift patterns that are there. There's a lot of staff that start there very early in the mornings as well. So again, we've got to take account of all of that data. So I don't have the answers to those questions as it stands, Councillor Gardner, but I do know that is part of the project and we will be looking at that. And we'll try and address it as best we can.
Great, thank you. And I think this report really speaks to the clear need for the investment and at Birchmere. And I know you've got the feasibility study coming forward this month. I had two kind of questions around maybe one about sort of funding and logistics. So appreciate that once a business case is maybe developed after the feasibility study, where would we sort of be looking for funding to support that? Would that sort of be internal, third-party government or a range? And maybe sort of slightly prematurely, but if we were to carry through the works, any major works, maybe it hasn't been done yet, but how would we think about continuing to run services while doing such major works. And I mean, I imagine that would be a bit of a headache to work out, but appreciate thoughts on those.
Yeah, we don't know the cost yet, so, funding's a little bit up in the air, but what I can say is I've already managed to secure some grant funding from government to decarbonise the site, so get rid of the gas-fired boilers there and put in low-carbon heating, so that's some funding I've already secured. Can't remember the value off the top of my head, but it went into six figures. And obviously, then once we've worked out the cost of the whole scheme, we'll be looking at the best way of funding it. Probably going to be capital, probably be looking at the council resources, but of course we recognise the council resources are stretched. It might have to be part of the whole kind of asset management strategy, but also we'll look for any funding opportunities we can find as part of that programme of work. There are some facilities that run out of that site that support our networks. We have our winter gritting processes in there, whether there's routes of funding through those chains to secure any funding. So it'll be a combination of all activities, because it's going to be a relatively expensive project, I suspect. The electrification itself goes into the millions just to get the site ready for that. And then, as you've rightly pointed out, actually, how do you go about delivering the works on an operational site? That's a real challenge. So where we're at the moment is just working out the kind of a sort of a site master plan. So what are the facilities that are needed on the site? Where are they best placed to maximise the use of the site and get the best out of the asset? Once we've done all of that work, we'll then start to think about how we might actually go about delivering it. And again, that may need to look at some off-site strategies potentially, depending on how feasible it's going to be to deliver the work. It's a very busy site. There's circa 1,200 people going in and out of that facility, all the repairs processes. There's about 460 fleet vehicles there, so it's a very, very, very busy site. So it's going to be a challenge. It's going to be a long project, but yeah, we're planning all of that at the moment.
Yeah, Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Chair. I had just one question, and obviously there'll be an impact on the site of changes the council are making to stuff like waste collection. Has that been factored into the fact that might then change, what is needed at the site? We might not need as many bin collection vehicles because there's fewer routes being done, or routes can be done quicker. And so does that add another layer of complexity, I guess, to planning on the future of the site, that actually we can't be entirely sure how the site will be used in 3, 5, 10 years' time?
Yeah, absolutely. Really good point. It is a challenge. We have sat down with all of the service heads and gone through and basically produced a 10-year plan for each area. There's a lot of moving parts in there. There's some work going on around transformation in a number of those services that will have impacts on the site, both in growth and probably also in optimisation. So we have planned that out, and we've planned in an element of factor of safety to cater for that unpredictability as best we can. It's a bit like putting a pin in fog, but yeah, we've produced a 10-year plan that we think is a pretty good plan. That's the basis of the master plan, and that's what will inform the design process. And those fleet numbers I was talking about a moment ago, there's capacity built into that for some growth, because that's likely to be needed given where the housing developments that are going on, they all generate, as I said, more bins and more repairs.
Sorry, I've got just one more question, Chair. I've been down to Birchmere on a site visit years ago, and for my own sort of trying to remember it, there's what I would call the dump, where I go and drop off my waste from home. Is that part of the wider Birchmere site? Is that within the feasibility? And so do you think, again, coming back to sort of the changes alluded to with changes of bins, etc., that there's potential for needing to expand that space if people have got less regular bin collections? Are we going to need to increase capacity there as well?
Sure, yeah. Now, I guess luckily for me, that's not inside the site boundary. Yeah, so that's the recycling centre for household waste off Magpie Lane, just off of Nathan Way. I know the site really well, just adjacent to Birchmere. It's actually outside the fence line, so that's not included. But yes, I know there's a whole piece of work just kicking off around what the waste strategy looks like in the future, which inevitably will have an impact on that, and then also have an impact on Birchmere. So again, we're factoring that into the site and the impacts it has on the site, but the recycling centre is separate.
Do you think, given the close nature of those sites, it would be the council would keep those sites separate, so you wouldn't bring them both together, looking at that feasibility study and sort of the future use? It would be to still keep them separate and not sort of amalgamate them together?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the recycling centre has a lot of public going in and out of it, and we definitely wouldn't want to mix those with heavy goods vehicles reversing and manoeuvring. That generates a lot of risk around, harm and so on. So yeah, definitely keep the two separate as a public facility and then a closed facility for operational frontline staff.
Great. Okay, should we move on to another question about Birchmere? Oh, yes, so should we move? Yeah. Oh, let's so actually we'll go to the second one first of the accessibility improvements at Arnott Close, Leslie Smith Square and Cutty Sark Gardens. If anyone has any specific questions, I have some
Not a
general
question.
questions. Oh, no, you go.
Knowing Leslie Smith Square very well, and having been a councillor there for the rebuilding of the Woolwich Common Community Centre, which is the new one, is brilliant. I'm just really pleased about this. I hope we're taking out the car park and putting in the play equipment there and greening it and so forth at the same time. But I'm really pleased that, that something's being done to improve the whole aspect of that area at the heart of the Woolwich Common Estate. But not a question so much as a comment, really.
Yeah, no, that's great to hear. So yeah, will be a play facility in Leslie Smith Square, and yeah, I think it will make a massive difference to that area.
Yeah, no, likewise. I think all three locations are really good, and it's great to see the work happening there. I suppose a more general question I had was about how areas that need sort of accessibility improvements, how do we sort of identify them and sort of prioritise them at more of a strategic level? Would be more interesting.
Yeah, so these, well, I guess stepping back a little bit, firstly, it's UK Shared Prosperity funded schemes. So it's a relatively modest sum with very tight timescales. So we had to factor, I think, in something around feasibility and viability for delivering in the timescale. So that was one element we looked at. And then secondly, it was just looking around the borough and actually engaged with some members around those areas of opportunity. And that's where these three locations were identified as all having some accessibility and sort of public realm issues. So we know, for example, at Arnott Close, it's a very different set of levels there. There's a community centre, there's some shops, so it's quite hard to access. So that's why the ramp solution was a good solution there, because it will improve accessibility across all of that community infrastructure. And then at Cutty Sark Gardens, there were some challenges around the steps in Cutty Sark Gardens not being very clear to people with visual impairments. The lighting's quite sporadic in Cutty Sark Gardens, some areas that are really bright and there's some areas that are really dark. So it's about balancing all of that and getting much better light levels to improve accessibility and also wayfinding. And then Leslie Smith Square was around improving the public realm, making it more accessible for the residents that live in that area and more attractive for them. So the schemes were picked on those basis of impact versus deliverability. So that's how they came forward for this particular project.
Nice, no, very good. Any other comments about? No?
No, having rolled my ankle in Cutty Sark Gardens, I can attest to the issues with seeing steps at times.
Brilliant. Okay, so we want to move on to any questions about the Woolwich Leisure Centre. Scott.
Well, not a question really, more a comment. I've, as on many issues, I've given Jeremy quite a hard time, especially at Planning Board on Woolwich Centre, but I've always been very much in favour of the Leisure Centre. I just queried why it was costing £80 million. I think I even said at Planning Board, is it going to have gold taps, which was a bit of a joke actually, but Jeremy was very robust in his reasoning for the cost, and I must say it looks really good. And I think GLL, who I've spoken to, are really looking forward to moving in. And I'm sure it will make a huge difference to Woolwich in terms of providing sort of another heart of the town centre next to the library and so forth, and or near to the library, and hopefully part of a new life and new regeneration for Woolwich. And it clearly make a big difference to people's health and to our leisure offer, which is great. So really what it would be good, I think what would be helpful is for councillors to be able to visit the leisure centre and when that might be possible, whether before it opens. But secondly, I really just wanted to, sadly, Jeremy Smalley is leaving the borough. And I don't know what other people feel, but I feel Jeremy has been a brilliant officer who has always been strategic, has always been patient, even when members, I'm sure, can be rather annoying at times, and has always been, shown great expertise and really professional. So we're very grateful to have had you for so long, and wish you all the best for the future.
Thank you. That's really touching and humbling comments. Thank you very much. That's very kind.
And just on the point about a visit, I'll absolutely look into that for sure, because I think it'll be a really good opportunity to showcase probably the complexity of the building, which might help answer some of the questions around cost, because it is a highly complex building and it will be a fantastic building. One of few of these types of facilities in London, probably the only one I think, but we'll see when we get to the end of it. It's quite what sort of BREEAM rating we get.
Councillor Littlewood. Thank
you. Yeah, I mean, I echo those comments. It's going to be an extraordinary building, and you can see it coming together sort of every day, really. And it's going to help move the centre of gravity, I think, which is sort of move towards the Arsenal back into the centre as well, which I think is another a great thing. I suppose my question is around sort of increased footfall, because if I look at where the leisure centre is going to be, you've got a zebra crossing on one side and traffic lights on the other. So if you've suddenly got lots of people moving across General Gordon Square from the Arsenal, they're going to be crossing that road a lot, competing with the buses and bus stops and zebra crossings and traffic lights and everything that's already there. Have we got and sorry, this might be written down somewhere, but is there a plan for how we manage that footfall to make sure everyone's safe and make sure that everything happens the way it should do?
Yes, it has been factored in. So one of the things we need to do, there's a Section 278 agreement, that is basically the agreement to do the highways modifications. And we're going to be putting in an improved crossover between the DLR station, cutting across Vincent Road. I've seen it, I use the DLR every day, and I see often people crossing that road with a bus coming down Woolwich New Road, wanting to turn right into Vincent Road and nearly having an accident. So we're going to be putting an improved crossover in there, raised, so it's traffic calming as well. So I think that will help get the footfall from the station into the building. It's also got quite a large colonnaded front to the building and enables that to have a bit of external capacity for that kind of area of sort of mingling and people sort of joining the facility. So I think that will help get people into the building in a more measured and controlled way to kind of stop curbside congestion, which might make it difficult for people to cross the road. So there's a number of factors we're including in that, plus also improving some of the wayfinding around the building. So we're hopeful those things will help with that particular situation.
Can I just add one thing there? Because I think that's a really, really good point, and I think that's one of the things that I want the urban frameworks to look at for Woolwich, because the project of the leisure centre can't do everything, but actually we do need to think really carefully about station approach. How do people move around, and how does the centre of gravity shift, and work with transport colleagues and TfL buses to look at actually have we got it set up in the right way for the whole of Woolwich, because it is changing. It's changed over the past couple of years, hasn't it, with the Elizabeth line opening, the kind of huge volume of people that come back and forth. And so that's one of the things I really hope the urban regeneration framework gets amongst, and this panel will obviously have a good look at that.
No, I said just two small ones. So one part of the Planning Commission obviously included the housing element as well for the leisure centre, and just sort of when we think that obviously is going to come later, but when you think that might be coming. And also, as you alluded to, it's kind of quite a rare facility we're building. It's quite an amazing thing to be seeing in London. And just what have you had any other sort of interest from other boroughs or any sort of outside parties that have sort of taken an interest or wanted to see what you're kind of doing?
Yeah, so second question first. So yeah, we've got Sport England working with us on this scheme, and in fact actually we managed to secure a reasonable sum from them of grant funding towards it. So they're definitely engaged and involved. We've had quite a lot of two-way dialogue with the Britannia Leisure Centre in Hackney, because that was built just prior to this one, so we've obviously kept a close eye on that and how that's been performing, and we'll use that to compare to the Woolwich Leisure Centre, because they're quite similar buildings. Ours is better, of course, and we'll be doing that comparison when it's complete. We haven't had any interest from them to come and look at it yet, but I know we've had some interest from other councils across the country looking at leisure centres, and we've had some inquiries from them around how the scheme's been designed and those sorts of things. So there's been some inquiries. But yeah, we're keeping a careful eye on some of the competition too. In terms of the housing piece, we didn't cover it in the report because the report was sort of focusing on the leisure centre. So I guess if there's an interest in that, it's something that will probably have to be added into the full plan for scrutiny in the future, should you wish to look at that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think, well, just to echo what Councillor Gardner said, Jeremy, thank you very much for all the contributions you've made to the council.
Thanks ever so much. It's really kind. It's been a privilege to work for Royal Borough of Greenwich, so I'm really grateful. Thank you very much.
Very much. I think we're sort of, that item's finished, and thank you very much. So just going on to item 8, commissioning of future reports. So just to note, the next meeting is going to be on the 6th of February 2024, which will be the annual transport scrutiny meeting, and also we pull the third-party strategic transport projects item onto that as well, because that will be focused on the DLR. So while TfL is here to make the most, to speak to them about that. And just to, before we finish, to clarify any recommendations that members wanted to make from tonight's items. We had the ones from the highways earlier on. But if there's any other recommendations you want to make at the moment. No? Okay, you can always email them if you want to. But okay, thank you very much. We'll finish there.